Captain Marcus Rivera's neural implants hummed softly as they processed the cascade of diplomatic chatter filling the Nexus Council chamber. The cybernetic enhancements, a permanent reminder of his last encounter with Veiltheran plasma weaponry. The scar tissue around his left temple itched whenever the translation matrices worked overtime, which was constantly during these peace negotiations that felt more like elaborate verbal warfare. "Status report, Captain." Admiral Chen's voice crackled through his comm implant, the encrypted channel barely audible above the din of interstellar politics. "Same circus, different day," Marcus subvocalized back, his enhanced vocal cords transmitting the message without moving his lips. "The Veil delegation is still posturing like they're doing us a favor by not glassing our colonies, and our people keep acting like we actually have leverage in this situation." The chamber itself was a monument to neutral territory pretensions, crystalline walls that shifted color based on the emotional resonance of the speakers, probably some Zenthari design meant to promote honesty through ambient mood lighting. Right now, the walls were cycling through shades of frustrated orange and suspicious purple, which seemed about right for peace talks between species that had been trying to kill each other for the better part of 3 decades. Queen Seraphina Veltereth commanded attention from her position at the primary negotiation podium, her luminescent blue skin casting subtle shadows that made her appear to glow from within. Marcus had studied the intelligence files on Veiltheran physiology, but seeing their monarch in person was like encountering a living constellation. Her pointed ears twitched with each diplomatic slight, a tell that his briefings had mentioned but failed to capture the elegant precision of. The human proposal regarding mining rights in the Kepler sector demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of territorial sovereignty. The Queen was saying, her voice carrying the musical quality that all Veil possessed but somehow more commanding. "Perhaps this stems from your species' relative youth on the galactic stage." Marcus bit back a laugh. Relative youth. Humans had been spacefaring for over 2 centuries, but to the Veil, who'd been building star-spanning empires when Earth was still figuring out agriculture, they were basically cosmic toddlers having a tantrum. "Your Majesty," Ambassador Williams responded with the kind of diplomatic patience that probably required medication. "The Kepler sector has been under human development for 40 years. Our mining operations predate any Veiltheran claims by 4 decades in a region we have considered our sovereign space for 4 millennia," Queen Seraphina interrupted, not unkindly but with the finality of gravity. "Time, Ambassador Williams, operates on different scales for different peoples." General Thane Mordak, the Queen's chief military advisor, leaned forward with the predatory grace that made Veiltheran warriors legendary. "Perhaps the humans would benefit from a more historical perspective on territorial boundaries. We could arrange educational tour of our border defense installations." The threat was as subtle as a supernova, and Marcus felt his hand instinctively move toward his sidearm before catching himself. The last thing these negotiations needed was a human soldier reaching for weapons in the presence of alien royalty. "That won't be necessary, General," Queen Seraphina said, and Marcus caught something in her tone. Was she actually restraining her own hardliners? "Education comes in many forms. I find the human approach to adaptation quite instructive." The chamber's chromatic walls shifted to curious yellow, apparently as confused by the Queen's statement as everyone else. Marcus found himself studying her more intently, noting the way she held herself slightly apart from her own delegation, the careful distance she maintained from General Mordak's increasingly aggressive posturing. Admiral Chen's voice buzzed in his ear. "Rivera, you're supposed to be observing for security threats, not staring at the alien royalty like a lovesick cadet." Heat flushed through Marcus's enhanced neural pathways, a side effect of embarrassment amplified by cybernetic processing. He forced his attention back to the tactical situation, scanning the chamber for potential threats, monitoring exit routes, calculating response times for various emergency scenarios. Standard protocol for a soldier whose job was to keep diplomats alive long enough to either make peace or declare war. But his gaze kept drifting back to Queen Seraphina as she navigated the verbal minefield of interspecies negotiations. There was something mesmerizing about watching a master at work. The way she deflected aggression from both sides while steadily steering the conversation toward actual solutions rather than rhetorical point scoring. The mining rights question is symptomatic of a larger issue, she continued, addressing the chamber with the kind of authority that came from ruling an empire spanning dozens of star systems. Both our peoples are expanding into regions where overlap becomes inevitable. The question is whether we approach this as competitors fighting over scraps, or as civilizations capable of finding mutual benefit. Marcus's tactical analysis subroutines flagged the subtle shift in her language. She'd moved from your expansion into our territory to mutual expansion with inevitable overlap. Either the Queen was more flexible than her reputation suggested, or she was playing a game several moves ahead of everyone else in the room. Mutual benefit assumes equal partnership, Ambassador Williams replied carefully. The Federation would welcome such an arrangement, provided territorial integrity is respected on both sides. General Mordak's expression suggested he'd rather respect a plague virus, but Queen Seraphina nodded thoughtfully. Equal partnership. An interesting concept. Tell me, Ambassador, what does equality look like between a species that measures progress in decades and one that measures it in centuries? The question hung in the air like a challenge, wrapped in philosophical inquiry. Marcus realized he was holding his breath, waiting to see how the human delegation would handle what might be either genuine curiosity or an elegant trap. Perhaps, the Queen continued, equality isn't about matching timescales, but about recognizing that different perspectives can strengthen both parties. The human capacity for rapid adaptation, combined with Veiltheron's strategic patience, could accomplish remarkable things. The chamber walls cycled through hopeful green before settling into cautious blue, apparently responding to the shifted emotional resonance of the room. Marcus found himself genuinely impressed by the Queen's diplomatic skill. She just suggested cooperation without compromising her position or insulting either delegation. It was also, he realized with growing unease, exactly the kind of intelligent flexibility that made her dangerously attractive as both an ally and a woman. The emergency session convened at 400 station time, jarring Marcus from restless sleep filled with dreams of luminescent blue skin and musical voices speaking languages his neural implants couldn't translate. The terrorist attack on Outpost Meridian had changed everything. 17 Veiltheron civilians dead, their research station reduced to glowing slag by what forensics confirmed were human-manufactured plasma charges. This is exactly what the hardliners on both sides wanted, Admiral Chen muttered as they hurried through Concordia Station's corridors toward the emergency chamber. Blood in the water, and now the sharks are circling. Marcus nodded grimly, his tactical systems already running probability matrices on how badly this would derail the peace process. The numbers weren't encouraging. Queen Seraphina would be under enormous pressure from her war council to respond with overwhelming force, while the human delegation would be scrambling to prove they hadn't sanctioned what looked suspiciously like a false flag operation. The chamber's chromatic walls were cycling through angry reds and violent purples when they arrived, the emotional resonance of the assembled delegates apparently overloading the Zenthari mood-sensing systems. Queen Seraphina sat rigidly upright in her chair, surrounded by Veiltheron military officials whose body language screamed barely restrained violence. General Mordak was speaking in rapid, musical Veiltheron, his tone making translation unnecessary. Marcus's implants provided subtitles anyway. 17 of our people murdered by human terrorists while conducting peaceful research. The appropriate response is immediate and overwhelming retaliation against their nearest colonies. General, Queen Seraphina's single word cut through his rhetoric like a plasma blade through hull plating. We are here to establish facts, not to plan revenge based on assumptions. Marcus caught the subtle emphasis on facts and felt a spark of something that might have been hope. The Queen wasn't buying into the war drums, at least not yet. Ambassador William stood to address the chamber, his face pale with the kind of exhaustion that came from trying to prevent interstellar war on 3 hours of sleep. Your Majesty, the Federation condemns this attack in the strongest possible terms. We are conducting a full investigation and will share all findings with your government. Investigations, General Mordek spat, switching to accented standard for maximum insult value. Human investigations of human crimes. How reassuring. The chamber walls flared toward violent orange, and Marcus felt his hand drift toward his sidearm again. The general's tone was crossing lines that usually led to shooting, and the Veiltheran honor guards were starting to shift their weight in ways that made his threat assessment protocols sing warnings. Perhaps, Queen Seraphina said with dangerous quiet, the general would benefit from reviewing the preliminary forensic data before drawing conclusions about human culpability. She activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber with three-dimensional crime scene analysis. Marcus studied the data with professional interest, his enhanced vision picking out details that pure biological perception might miss. The plasma signatures are indeed consistent with human technology, the Queen continued, but notice the targeting patterns. 17 dead but 0 military casualties. The attackers specifically avoided the station's defense personnel while eliminating civilian researchers. Marcus's tactical systems flagged the anomaly immediately. Human military doctrine emphasized neutralizing threats first. Any legitimate strike would have targeted the defensive installations before moving to soft targets. This felt more like a message than a military operation. Furthermore, Queen Seraphina highlighted specific data points. The timing of this attack, occurring during our peace negotiations, suggests coordination with someone who had detailed knowledge of our diplomatic schedule. General Mordek's expression shifted from righteous anger towards something more calculating. You're suggesting our own security has been compromised. I'm suggesting, the Queen replied carefully, that this attack serves the interests of those who profit from continued conflict between our peoples. Such individuals exist in both our societies. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of life support systems, and the subtle whir of Marcus's neural implants processing the implications. If Queen Seraphina was right, if this was a false flag operation designed to derail the peace talks, then both governments had hardliners willing to murder civilians to maintain the status quo. Ambassador Williams cleared his throat. Your Majesty, if you're suggesting a joint conspiracy, I'm suggesting nothing, Queen Seraphina interrupted. I'm stating facts. This attack was professionally executed by individuals with access to human weapons and Veiltheran intelligence. The logical conclusion is that our enemies are not each other, but those within our own ranks who fear peace more than war. Marcus felt his respect for the Queen's analytical abilities growing along with something more dangerous, genuine admiration for her courage in facing uncomfortable truths. It would have been easier for her to blame humans and rally her people for war. Instead, she was risking her political position to pursue actual justice. His calm implant buzzed with an encrypted message from Admiral Chen. Rivera, I'm reading elevated stress patterns from the Veiltheran delegation. Stay alert for potential violence. Marcus acknowledged the warning while studying the alien's body language. General Mordek looked like he'd swallowed something toxic, while the other military officials were exchanging glances that suggested rapid recalculation of their strategic positions. If Your Majesty is correct, General Mordek said slowly, then we face a more complex threat than simple human aggression. Our response must be appropriately sophisticated. The words were diplomatically phrased, but Marcus caught the subtext. If enemies within both governments were working to maintain conflict, then traditional military responses wouldn't solve the problem. They needed intelligence operations, careful investigation, the kind of delicate work that required cooperation between species that barely trusted each other under the best circumstances. Queen Seraphina's gaze swept the chamber, and for a moment her eyes met Marcus's across the diplomatic divide. In that brief contact, he saw something that made his enhanced neural pathways flutter: recognition, understanding, and perhaps the beginning of trust between two people caught in an impossible situation. "Captain Rivera," she said, and his name in her musical voice sent unexpected warmth through his augmented nervous system. "Your military analysis systems are quite sophisticated. What do you make of the tactical patterns we've observed?" Every diplomat in the chamber turned to stare at him, and Marcus realized the Queen had just put him in an incredibly delicate position. Answer too aggressively, and he'd be seen as warmongering. Too passively, and he'd appear weak. But something in her expression suggested this wasn't a trap, it was an invitation to honest professional assessment. "The targeting priorities are all wrong for a military operation, Your Majesty," he said carefully. "This looks more like terrorism designed to provoke a specific response than a strategic strike intended to achieve tactical advantage." Queen Seraphina nodded slowly. "And what response do you believe the perpetrators hope to provoke?" Marcus felt the weight of history pressing down on his answer. Exactly what's happening right now. Emergency sessions, accusations, breakdown of diplomatic progress. Someone wants us angry at each other instead of working together. The Queen's slight smile was like sunrise on an alien world, beautiful, unexpected, and slightly dangerous to look at directly. Then perhaps our most effective response would be to disappoint them by continuing to work together. The secure communication protocols felt like digital espionage, encrypted channels bouncing through 17 relay stations to avoid detection by either government's intelligence services. Marcus found himself in the surreal position of conducting covert operations against his own chain of command while trying to prevent a galactic war. "The pattern analysis confirms your hypothesis," he subvocalized into his encrypted comm, knowing Queen Seraphina would receive the message through equally convoluted Veiltheran security networks. 3 more incidents in the past 48 hours, all following the same profile: maximum civilian casualties, minimum military impact, perfect timing to disrupt diplomatic progress. Her response came back 20 minutes later, the delay necessary to maintain operational security. "Our investigation has identified corresponding anomalies in military supply chains. Someone with high-level access has been redirecting weapons and intelligence to unauthorized recipients. The conspiracy involves individuals we both trusted." Marcus stared at the holographic data display in his quarters, cross-referencing human and Veiltheran incident reports that painted a picture of systematic manipulation by extremist elements in both governments. The scope was breathtaking: coordinated attacks designed to look like escalating aggression between species, all orchestrated to keep the war machine profitable for those who controlled military contracts and territorial expansion. His door chimed with an incoming visitor, and Marcus's enhanced reflexes had him reaching for his sidearm before Admiral Chen's voice called out, "Rivera, we need to talk." "Come in, Admiral," Marcus replied, quickly closing the classified displays while wondering how much trouble he was about to be in. Admiral Chen entered looking like she'd aged a decade in the past week, the stress of maintaining peace while conspirators undermined every diplomatic gain written in the lines around her eyes. "Captain, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Are you conducting unauthorized intelligence sharing with the Veiltheran delegation?" The question hung between them like an armed explosive. Marcus could lie, claim ignorance, follow protocols that would probably lead to war within the month. Or he could trust his commanding officer with the truth and hope she understood that sometimes duty meant "Yes, ma'am," he said simply. Admiral Chen closed her eyes for a long moment, then moved to his window overlooking Concordia Station's observation deck. "How bad is it, Marcus?" "Bad enough that if we don't work together, we're going to find ourselves fighting a war that neither side actually wants, orchestrated by people who profit from keeping us at each other's throats." She turned back to face him, and Marcus saw the moment when his commanding officer became a fellow human being faced with an impossible choice. "Show me." The next hour was spent reviewing encrypted intelligence, cross-referencing attack patterns, and building a comprehensive picture of the conspiracy that spanned both governments. Admiral Chen asked sharp questions, challenged assumptions, and gradually came to the same conclusions that had driven Marcus toward his unauthorized cooperation with Queen Seraphina. "Jesus Christ," she muttered, staring at the evidence. "This goes all the way up to the Defense Council. No wonder they've been pushing for aggressive responses to every incident." "The Queen is facing similar pressure from her War Council," Marcus explained. "General Mordak represents old guard thinking, but she's identified at least 3 other senior officials who have been undermining the peace process while publicly supporting it." Admiral Chen was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. "If we expose this conspiracy through official channels, the people we're trying to expose will be the ones evaluating the evidence. But if we don't stop them soon, they're going to manufacture an incident large enough to make war inevitable." Marcus's comm implant chimed with an incoming priority message, this one through official channels. "Emergency session in 1 hour," he read aloud. "All delegations required to attend for critical security briefing." "That doesn't sound good," Admiral Chen observed. The emergency session turned out to be a trap so obvious that Marcus was amazed anyone fell for it. General Harrison from the Defense Council presented conclusive evidence that the recent attacks had been coordinated by Queen Seraphina herself as part of a systematic campaign to weaken human resolve while appearing to negotiate in good faith. The evidence was comprehensive, professional, and completely fabricated. Marcus recognized several pieces of intercepted Veiltheran communications that had actually been generated by human AI systems using linguistic templates from public broadcasts. The forensic analysis of attack sites had been selectively edited to remove data points that contradicted the official narrative. Queen Seraphina sat through the presentation with regal composure, but Marcus could see the tension in her posture, the slight tremor in her pointed ears that indicated barely controlled fury. Her own delegation was beginning to shift restlessly, several military advisors whispering urgent consultations that probably involved phrases like immediate retaliation and overwhelming response. "These allegations are serious," Queen Seraphina said when General Harrison finished his presentation. "I assume the human government is prepared to provide full access to the original data for independent verification." "I'm afraid that's classified beyond your security clearance, Your Majesty," General Harrison replied with the kind of diplomatic courtesy that was actually an insult. "However, our analysis leaves no room for doubt about Veiltheran involvement in these attacks." Marcus felt his neural implants surge with something that wasn't quite rage, but was definitely in the same family. The general was lying to prevent a war by starting a war, destroying the peace process to save it, and condemning thousands of people to die for the sake of maintaining profitable conflict. "General," Admiral Chen stood up, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded starships in actual combat, "I'd like to review that forensic data personally before we draw any final conclusions." "Admiral, with respect, this matter is beyond the scope of military analysis. The Defense Council has reviewed all available evidence and reached its determination." "The Defense Council," Admiral Chen replied with dangerous quiet, doesn't speak for the entire military command structure, and some of us prefer to examine evidence before condemning an entire species to war. The chamber's chromatic walls were cycling through increasingly violent shades of red and purple, apparently struggling to process the emotional chaos of multiple delegations on the brink of open conflict. Marcus realized they were approaching the point of no return. In another few minutes, someone would say something that couldn't be unsaid, and the conspiracy would achieve its goal through pure momentum. Queen Seraphina stood with fluid grace, commanding attention through presence rather than volume. Admiral Chen raises an excellent point about the importance of thorough analysis. Perhaps Captain Rivera, with his enhanced analytical capabilities, could provide an independent assessment of the forensic data. The suggestion hit the chamber like a quantum torpedo. All attention suddenly focused on Marcus, as he found himself caught between loyalty to his chain of command and loyalty to the truth. General Harrison's expression suggested that choosing the wrong side would be a career-ending mistake, while Queen Seraphina's steady gaze offered something that might have been trust or might have been a challenge. Marcus realized that this was the moment, the decision point where he would either be complicit in a conspiracy that would kill thousands, or take a stand that would almost certainly destroy his military career and possibly his freedom. "I'd be honored to provide an independent analysis, Your Majesty," he heard himself say, the words carrying the weight of choosing principle over protocol. General Harrison's smile was sharp enough to cut hull plating. "Captain Rivera, I don't think you fully understand the classification levels involved in this intelligence." "I understand them perfectly, sir," Marcus replied, meeting the general's gaze with steady determination. "I also understand the difference between classified intelligence and manufactured propaganda, and I know which one I've been looking at for the past week." The final treaty ceremony was scheduled for 1400 station time. Assuming both delegations survived the political firestorm that had erupted after Marcus's public challenge to General Harrison's fabricated evidence. The past 24 hours had seen emergency meetings, frantic communications with home governments, and at least 2 attempted arrests that had been quietly avoided through diplomatic immunity. Marcus stood in his dress uniform, knowing it might be the last time he wore it as a free man. Admiral Chen had managed to buy him temporary protection by invoking military justice protocols, but that wouldn't last once they returned to Earth. The court-martial proceedings would be swift and decisive, assuming he lived long enough to face them. "Status report, Captain," came the familiar voice through his comm implant, though Admiral Chen was standing right beside him. "All quiet on the conspiracy front," he subvocalized back. "Either they've given up, or they're planning something spectacular for the signing ceremony." Queen Seraphina entered the chamber like a force of nature contained in elegant alien features, her luminescent blue skin seeming to pulse with inner determination. She'd spent the past day purging her own delegation of conspirators, a process that had apparently involved some very traditional Veiltharian justice methods. General Mordak was notably absent, along with 3 other senior advisors whose loyalties had proven more complex than their oaths suggested. "Nervous?" Admiral Chen asked quietly. Marcus considered the question seriously. In a few hours, he'd either be witnessing the signing of the most important peace treaty in galactic history, or watching civilization collapse into a war that would make their previous conflicts look like diplomatic disagreements. His career was over, his freedom was questionable, and he was standing in a room full of people who wanted him dead. "Terrified," he admitted, "but I'd rather be terrified and right than comfortable and complicit." The ceremony began with the traditional pageantry of interstellar diplomacy, holographic displays of both civilizations' greatest achievements, musical performances that somehow managed to blend human and Veiltharian artistic traditions, and speeches about the importance of peace that everyone hoped weren't being delivered for the last time. Marcus found his attention drifting to Queen Seraphina as she moved through the ritual formalities with practiced grace. Over the past week, their covert cooperation had revealed depths to her character that the intelligence briefings had never captured. She was brilliant, yes, and politically sophisticated, but also genuinely committed to her people's welfare in ways that transcended traditional power structures. Captain Rivera, her musical voice cut through his reverie, and he realized she was addressing him directly during what was supposed to be a ceremonial moment. Your analytical assessment of the conspiracy evidence was illuminating. Both our peoples owe you a debt of gratitude. The formal acknowledgement sent ripples of surprise through both delegations. Queen Serafina was publicly crediting a human soldier with exposing treachery within her own government, a gesture that would have significant political implications back on the Veiltheran homeworld. "I was just doing my duty, Your Majesty," Marcus replied, though he wondered if that was entirely true. At some point during the investigation, his motivation had shifted from professional obligation toward something more personal. "Duty?" Queen Serafina repeated thoughtfully. "An interesting concept. Does duty require us to follow orders that serve corruption, or to follow principles that serve justice?" The question was clearly rhetorical, but it hung in the air like a philosophical challenge to everyone present. Marcus realized she was making a point about the choices they'd all faced, the moment when personal ethics had to take precedence over institutional loyalty. The actual treaty signing proceeded smoothly until the moment when both leaders were supposed to activate their respective government seals, formally binding their civilizations to peace. That's when the real sabotage attempt began. The chamber's environmental systems suddenly shifted to emergency lockdown, blast doors sealing all exits, while atmospheric processors began cycling toward toxic levels. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and Marcus's threat assessment protocols immediately identified this as a last-ditch effort by conspiracy elements to eliminate both delegations and blame it on the other side. "Everyone stay calm," Admiral Chen commanded, though her hand was already moving toward her sidearm. "This is obviously a mechanical malfunction." Marcus's enhanced systems were picking up energy signatures that definitely weren't mechanical. Someone was broadcasting override codes to the station's control systems from multiple locations. The conspirators were trying to murder everyone in the chamber and frame it as a massive terrorist attack that would justify total war between species. Queen Serafina was coordinating with her security team in rapid Veiltheran, their musical language taking on urgent harmonies that Marcus's implants translated as evacuation procedures and defensive positions. But the sealed blast doors weren't responding to override codes from either delegation, and the atmospheric readings were approaching dangerous levels. "Your Majesty," Marcus called out over the rising alarm sirens, "the control overrides are coming from external sources. Someone's operating the lockdown remotely." She turned toward him with those luminescent eyes that had haunted his dreams. "Can your systems track the transmission sources?" Marcus's neural implants were already working the problem, analyzing signal patterns and triangulating broadcast origins. 3 sources, probably portable units hidden throughout the station. If we can locate and disable them. An explosion somewhere in the station's superstructure cut off his analysis, the lights flickering as power systems struggled to compensate for whatever damage had been inflicted. The environmental readings were approaching critical levels, and Marcus realized they had maybe 10 minutes before the atmosphere became lethal. "The transmission sources are mobile," he announced, his enhanced vision tracking energy patterns through the station's infrastructure. "Someone's moving them to prevent tracking, but I can predict their next positions based on signal optimization algorithms." Queen Serafina made a decision that surprised everyone, including her own security team. "Captain Rivera, you have the most sophisticated analysis systems present. I'm placing you in tactical command of this evacuation." The statement sent shock waves through both delegations. a human soldier, given command authority by an alien queen, in the middle of a crisis that could determine the fate of galactic civilization. Marcus felt the weight of absolute responsibility settle on his shoulders like a collapsed star. "Admiral Chen, can your people handle the blast door overrides?" he asked, his enhanced neural pathways switching into full tactical mode. "Queen Seraphina, I need your security team to locate and neutralize the transmission sources. My systems can guide them, but they'll need to move fast." The next 8 minutes were a blur of coordinated action that shouldn't have been possible between species that had been trying to kill each other a week earlier. Human and Veiltheran personnel worked together with desperate efficiency, following Marcus's tactical coordination, while Queen Seraphina translated complex technical instructions into rapid musical Veiltheran. They disabled 2 of the 3 transmission sources before the third one activated what was obviously a dead man's switch. If they couldn't kill the negotiating teams through environmental sabotage, they'd settle for a massive explosion that would take out half the station. "Evacuation pods are ready," Admiral Chen reported, "but the blast range will extend beyond the safe distance threshold." Marcus stared at the tactical display, his enhanced processing power calculating trajectories and blast patterns with desperate precision. There was a solution, but it required someone to stay behind and manually override the station's containment systems to channel the explosion away from the evacuation routes. "I'll handle the manual override," he said quietly, knowing it was a death sentence but unable to see any alternative. "No," Queen Seraphina's voice carried absolute authority. "We do this together, or not at all." She moved to stand beside him at the override console, her luminescent blue fingers intertwining with his augmented human hands on the control interface. "2 people can input the override codes faster than 1. And if we're going to die stopping a conspiracy, we should die having prevented a war." Marcus looked into her alien eyes and saw something that transcended species boundaries: courage, determination, and something else that made his enhanced neural pathways flutter with recognition. In this moment of absolute crisis, surrounded by the consequences of choosing principle over protocol, he realized he wasn't just willing to die to prevent galactic war. He was willing to die beside someone he'd come to respect, admire, and, though it defied every regulation and social boundary, love. "Your Majesty," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the alarms and evacuation procedures, "there's something I need to say before." She pressed her fingers gently against his lips, her touch electric against his augmented nervous system. "Later, Captain Rivera, after we save both our civilizations, you can tell me whatever you need to say." They worked together, inputting the override sequences, human and Veiltheran technology interfacing in ways that shouldn't have been possible but somehow felt natural. The blast containment systems activated with seconds to spare, channeling the explosion's energy away from the evacuation routes and into space where it could dissipate harmlessly. As the emergency systems finally stabilized and the blast doors unsealed, Marcus found himself still standing beside Queen Seraphina, both of them alive against all reasonable expectations. The evacuation teams were returning, the treaty documents were intact, and the conspiracy that had threatened to destroy galactic peace was finally broken. "Captain Rivera," Queen Seraphina said softly, her musical voice somehow carrying over the noise of recovery operations, "I believe you had something you wanted to tell me." Marcus looked around the chamber, at the delegations from both species who were staring at them with mixtures of amazement and respect, at Admiral Chen, who was probably already calculating the diplomatic implications of what had just happened, at the treaty documents that would reshape galactic civilization. And in that moment, surrounded by the witnesses to their impossible survival and their even more impossible cooperation, Marcus Rivera whispered the words he'd never planned to say, never expected anyone to hear, words that carried the weight of a week that had changed everything. "I wish I could marry her." The chamber fell silent except for the hum of restored life support systems. Every diplomat, every soldier, every alien dignitary turned to stare at the human captain, who just confessed his impossible love for the queen of a species they'd been at war with for decades. Queen Seraphina Veltereth, ruler of the Veiltheran Empire, master of interstellar diplomacy, savior of galactic peace, turned toward Marcus with those luminescent eyes that held the light of distant stars. Her pointed ears twitched once, a gesture he'd learned indicated deep emotion, and when she spoke, her musical voice carried clearly to every corner of the chamber. "My answer is yes.